Hi everyone, Kim here at Olive City Homestead. The past week or two, I have been very busy preserving my food. I know it's the end of November, right? The end of fall already. We're heading into winter almost, and that is why I have had to get these fruits, these cherry tomatoes, and other veggies off of my plants because the frost has arrived here. It's been coming and going, but it has hit here 3 or 4 nights already. So before the rest of the tomatoes are damaged, I wanted to this year do something different. Instead of wasting it all, I wanted to make good use of it. And so I did a bunch of research and I came up with a few recipes to try. They worked super well. We really enjoyed them at Thanksgiving, and I'm going to serve some more at Christmas. And as you can see from what's behind me, plenty more green cherry tomatoes along with other fruits and veggies that I need to get off the plants this week. I mean, December is only a couple days away, and yeah, I need to get them off and go ahead and process as much of them as I can now that I know how easy it is to do. Now, some of you might be really familiar with water bath canning, but I've only done it a few times before now, and so these last few weeks of water bath canning so many different things, I have become very comfortable and confident with it, and I just feel like it is such a great way for us to preserve our foods. You don't have to worry about exploding pressure canners. It's very safe, very quick, very easy, and it's my new go-to method for preserving foods because, freezers can only hold so much. I've got 3 freezers and they're always packed full. And yes, I dry a lot, especially for all my teas and my herbs, but canning, well, it has its place now. And in this video, I'm going to share with you from start to finish how to make something really special with your green tomatoes and another ingredient, a volunteer plant I had this year that I'm really glad I did because it is a great addition to a lot of recipes. And if you're not familiar with water bath canning, if you're a complete novice or you just want kind of a refresher course of some safety tips, hang on to the end of the video. I will share with you some good advice that I found through solid research that will make you feel really comfortable and confident yourself as you try out your own water bath canning on your own fruits and vegetables.
Look at all those tomatoes, green tomatoes, orange tomatoes, red tomatoes. They're all cherry tomatoes. And I'm going to clean them all up and separate them and see what we've got. Plus, I've got all these purple tomatillos. I'm going to remove the husks and clean them off. And let's just see what we can make from this harvest that I had to do because of the frost finally arriving here. This is what I'm left with. Green cherry tomatoes, red and orange cherry tomatoes, and these lovely, beautiful purple tomatillos. What am I going to do with them? Well, I found a few cool things I can use these for. Now, if you're not familiar with tomatillos, they are quite different in some ways than tomatoes. They're more almost like a ground cherry, if you've ever grown those. They have a husk around them. And you can see as they grow larger that the husk starts to fall away as the tomato, or rather the tomatilla, starts to outgrow the husk until finally it gets to such a size that it's almost completely out of the husk. At this point, somewhere in this stage here, they drop to the ground, and that is when you know they're ripe. If they're still in the plant, they're not ripe yet. And if they fall into the ground, they're ripe. However, good news for us, it doesn't matter if they're on the ground for days, even weeks, they're still going to be fine, unless some lucky bird or rodent finds them. But if they're just sitting on the ground, even in the kind of high dry heat I get here in Northern California, they stay just fine. It's a little difficult, not quite, just a little awkward to peel it away when they're tiny. But as they get bigger, it just pops right off, that husk. Now, you can call them tomatillas, you can call them tomatillos, but there are a few things you should know about them. One is that if the husk is completely covering it, you really shouldn't eat them. They probably won't hurt you, but they might cause an adverse reaction. 2, a little more important than that, is that the husk, the vines, and the leaves of the tomatilla plant are actually thought of as poisonous. I don't know a lot more about it than that,
I just stay away from them, that part of the plant, and I highly advise that you do as well. Now, can they be eaten raw? Yes, but they're usually eaten cooked. But you can use them in any way that you might use a tomato or green tomato, but there is quite a difference in taste. The tomatilla has a more acidic taste, and it is also more citrusy than a tomato. It is definitely less sweet than a tomato. Therefore, you should not expect the same result in the recipes you use them in. However, they are fabulous when made with a combination of other ingredients such as cilantro and lime and onion and garlic, and mixed in with some green and orange and red tomatoes in salsas and chutneys and any variety of Mexican dishes you might use, whether to put in a rice dish or to serve on the side with chips, just about anything you can think of, not only Mexican related, but also with Indian dishes. So really lots of room to explore here with using tomatillas or tomatillos, however you want to call it. Now, tomatillas come in a variety of colors, green mostly, but also white and purple. And I just happen to have the purple ones growing, and that's kind of cool because I have now quite a little rainbow going on. So the first thing I'm going to make today is a green tomato and purple tomatilla sweet chutney recipe. I have never made this before, and I'm adapting several recipes, mixing them together and adding my own little weird tweaks to create something new. I just like to do that, and I like to work with what I have on hand. So far, in addition to 4 cups of green cherry tomatoes and 2 cups of purple tomatillas, I've added some golden raisins and some dried cranberries, a cup of each. And now I'm going to add several other things, including some green walking onions. Well, I've just pulled this bunch right out of the ground in my garden. And normally I just harvest walking onions from the top and let them regrow year after year. They will give me several harvests in one season. They overwinter fabulously. And now that I've had them 3 years, I literally have hundreds and hundreds of these plants. No exaggeration. If you watch my video on growing the best green onions ever, plant them once and you'll never have to plant them again. Because of the way that they produce baby green onions at the top in little bulbils once or twice a year, for so easy to transplant. So because of that, because I have so many now growing all around the place, well, I can afford to just pull them up by the clump now when I want to use every part of them. And this kind of helps me out, unless I was going to start a green onion farm, I really don't need thousands and millions of these plants. So occasionally I do use up the whole plant. Well, that only took about 15 seconds to clean those off. Now I'm going to cut the roots off and chop them up. All right, plopping in 2 tablespoons of peeled grated ginger. I didn't grow a lot of ginger this year, but I did grow enough for some recipes like this one. I measured for you. I never measure, but if a recipe says use 3 green onions, what does that even mean? Green onions come in all kinds of sizes, right? So you saw the bunch I used. Well, I chopped it up using the greens and the white part, and it came to 1 cup exactly chopped up. So that's what I'm using in this one. Now, I did not peel or cut up at all the green tomatoes or the tomatillas. Some recipes for chutney and for salsa and other types of recipes like this will tell you to peel and seed your tomatoes and your tomatillas. However, others will tell you you don't need to do it. And I'm all for doing as little work as possible. I suppose if you feel like you have problems with the skin of tomatoes, then you might want to peel them. But that sounds like a whole lot more work than I would do using cherry tomatoes and tomatillas because they're so small. I really don't think you'll notice once it cooks down like it's going to do for several hours in the slow cooker. 1 cup and 1 extra tablespoon of brown sugar. Half a cup of apple cider vinegar. And 1.5 teaspoons of allspice. So I just added in 1/2 teaspoon of ground cloves. Now 1/2 teaspoon of red pepper flakes. I guess if you know you like it hotter, you can go hotter, but I would go with this amount or less to begin with because this is a chutney. It's not a salsa, so you're not really going for heat. You're going for kind of a sweet chutney flavor, sweet and spicy, okay? So try it whatever way you want. This is my base trial recipe, and I will adjust from here. I don't really have anyone in my direct family that would want it super hot, and in any case, I'm making some hot salsa tomorrow. Last but not least, salt. We're gonna do 1.5 teaspoons. All right, I've stirred it up pretty well. It looks awesome and it smells even more amazing. Like I've never really smelled anything quite like this. I have decided not to add any water to this. I'm just gonna leave that 1/2 cup of apple cider vinegar I added because I think that cooking it in the slow cooker here with the lid on it for 4 to 6 hours is going to create quite a bit of obviously steam, and it's going to break these tomatoes down. Just like when you cook jam, the fruit gets broken down. Well, these tomatoes and these tomatillas, they're gonna break down and there's so much liquid in them. I actually don't think I'm gonna need any water, but I'll keep an eye on it. If in the end I need some more liquid, I'll add a little water or maybe a little more vinegar, depending on the taste. So let's get this cooking and I'll meet you back here in a few hours and we'll see what it looks like. 2 hours in, and this is how the chutney is looking. Now, to save time, instead of slicing up, chopping up all those green cherry tomatoes and tomatillas ahead of time, I'm just using my potato masher to mash them up. And this works especially well after you have let them cook about an hour at least to soften up. And it's working great, and I think it looks awesome. And let me tell you, the smell, well, it smells like my Christmas stuffing because a lot of the things I use in that, the vinegar, what else? The spices, allspice and cloves and red pepper. These are all very similar, and so that's what the house smells like right now. Very nice. All right, we'll come back and see what it looks like in another couple of hours. All done now. Doesn't it look wonderful? It is so good too. I just tried some and it's tangy and sweet and spicy and really not like anything I've tried before. I cannot believe that I made this with green cherry tomatoes and some random volunteer tomatillas. These are fruits that really in the past would have gone to waste in the fall, you know, when the frost hits. And I just always have so many hundreds and hundreds of green tomatoes and green cherry tomatoes that I never really took the time to figure out what to do with. Now I know. I'm very pleased with this first recipe I've tried, and I will include the recipe in the description below. And tomorrow I'm going to take the rest of my green tomatoes along with my red and orange tomatoes and my green onions and cilantro and lime and lots of other good stuff and make some salsa verde. I think what I'm going to do is serve this with some rice as a side dish at Thanksgiving next week when my kids come to visit. And I think also I'm going to can some and maybe give some as gifts this Christmas. So here is the end result. This is the green tomato and purple tomatillo chutney that I made. It made 4 or 5 jars. We ate one entirely at Thanksgiving, and it is so good. I've never had chutney before, and I was really pleased, a little surprised, but very pleased at how much I enjoyed it. I've never liked cranberry sauce, and I'd read that, you know, it could take the place of that, and it was sort of similar to that, but because I never liked cranberry sauce, I wasn't sure I would like this. But I have a lot of kids that like Indian food, and so I knew someone would enjoy it. Well, it turns out we all liked it. So this was a real win-win. Now, the other thing I made, as I alluded to in the video, was salsa. I made what I'm calling rainbow salsa because of all the different colors I used of the red, orange, yellow, and green cherry tomatoes, as well as the purple tomatillas. This salsa, you know, combined with the green peppers and the cilantro, it turned out fabulous. Now, you have to understand that we are very much a salsa family. This town we live in is predominantly Mexican, and the Mexican stores and restaurants here are fabulous. And we've just grown up here in Northern California with, Mexican food as a staple, and we love it. And so we eat chips and salsa all the time. This is so good. I really never have to buy salsa again. I can just make this, and I can vary it too to be as hot or as mild as different family and friends like. Some of those in my family even like salsa with fruit, so I can definitely be experimenting with that as well. So definite success. I highly encourage you to experiment in your kitchen, experiment with your garden produce, and don't be afraid to try new things. Okay, here is my condensed version on water bath canning tips for safety and confidence in the kitchen. Now, let me just put in a disclaimer that, I'm no expert or anything, but water bath canning is considered pretty easy to learn how to do safely, and you can do your own research. And if you live in a higher elevation, higher than 1,000 feet above sea level, you should definitely look up the times you need to use to process your food, because it will be increased from what it reads for everyone else. Otherwise, here is some basic knowledge and tips for you. Number 1, why do we even water bath can at all? Well, that's because we want to stop bacteria growth. And some foods are naturally really acidic, so they don't need to be pressure canned. And those that are borderline just need the help of an acidic agent. And then those foods can be processed through water bath canning, and the heat alone, along with the natural acid or the added acid, will be enough to keep the bacteria from ever growing, preventing, botulism, illness, death, that kind of thing, which we don't want to go anywhere near. So most fruits are naturally acidic, and they only need the addition of, say, lemon juice to make them a perfect candidate for water bath canning, to process them for shelf stability. Another thing that's perfect for water bath canning is pickled vegetables, and that's because you're adding the acidic agent of vinegar to the mix, and that prevents the bacteria from growing. And then you have tomatoes and tomato products like salsas and chutneys and tomato sauces, tomato purees. Well, tomatoes are borderline. Some varieties are kind of acidic, but some are not. And so we always want to add vinegar and lemon juice to tomato products to make them safe for water bath canning. Now, on to the technical bits. When you are water bath canning, what do you need? Well, you just need the big pot. It's got to be deep enough that your jars can fit in it on a rack, with enough space for there to be at least an inch of water above them during the boiling process. A rack for the jars to sit on, because you want the water to be able to circulate underneath the jars, okay? You need the canning, I call them tongs, but basically they're specifically for canning, very wide, square-looking tongs that lift the jars in and out of the rack. The rack lifts up too, but you can just use the tongs, and you definitely need the tongs. I tried doing it without the tongs a time or two. That's not something I recommend. Other than that, you need the jars, mason jars, ball jars, they're called different things, variety of sizes they come in, and you need the lids and the rings. Now, the lids, the little circular discs, those are the only things that need to be replaced. The rings are just on during the water bath process or the pressurized canning process if you go that route, which I'm not doing. But after they are processed, the rings come off and are suggested that you take them off. That way, if you ever had a problem with leakage coming out of the seal, you would be aware of it. But the lids themselves, those circular discs, those are one-time use. So those are the only things that are disposable that you have to replace. Everything else you can keep reusing. Now, after you have cooked your salsa or your jam and you are ready to put it in the jars, you want to do it while it's still hot, and you have pre-sterilized your jars. Some people argue that as long as your jars are clean and hot, they don't need to be pre-sterilized, because they're going to be sterilized when you proceed with the water bath. But it's very easy to just stick those jars in your water as it comes to a boil and leave them in there for 10 minutes while you're cooking down your jams or your salsas or whatever. So I always do. So you're taking your hot product and you're pouring it into your hot jars. Now, I did just think of one other thing you really want to have, and that is a funnel. They have canning funnels that sit right inside the jars and make life so easy, no mess involved whatsoever. So you put your product in the jars, and here is an important bit. You need to leave 1/4 inch to 1 inch of head space above the food product. Some recipes will give you an exact amount, but it needs to be at least 1/4 inch. Usually it'll say 1/2 inch to 1 inch. Why is that? Because once the jars with the product are in the water bath, the heat will make the food and the air expand, and this pushes upward on the seal. And if there is enough room, then your food is not going to push out of the seal. It's going to stay in the jar and only the air will come out, which is why you never screw on the round rings too tightly. You screw them on, so they stay on, but you don't tighten them down because you want them to be loose enough that the air can release from there, escape from there as they are processed. So leave that headspace. Also, when you put the jars in on the rack, you want to have 1 inch of space between each of the jars because you want water circulation all the way around each jar, over, under, and around. Yes. Now, one thing it's recommended you do before you put the lids on is make sure there's no air bubbles in. Yeah, just check your jars. If you see any air bubbles, you can take a little citrus peeler or a little small knife or something. They sell tools for it, but really a citrus peeler works great. You just go around the edges, the sides of the jar to get rid of those air bubbles because you don't want that air trapped in there. The only other thing is before you put the lid on, make sure that the rim of the jar is clean. Like if you made a mess when you filled it, which you might do if you're not using a funnel, then you need to wipe that rim off with a clean towel so that it doesn't prevent the seal from happening. Now, I must say I've never had any air bubbles, though I check carefully, and I've never had any food on the rim because I use the funnel, so I haven't had to do those steps, but it's always good to be aware of that. Now, timing. Timing is important. Once you have all your jars in your pot, you bring the water back to a boil. Once it starts boiling again, you set your timer and put your lid on. All right, timing, well, it depends. With jams and jellies, it's shorter than with salsas, as you would expect. So for 1/2 pint jars of jams or jellies, you would water bath for 5 minutes, and for pints, for 10 minutes, which is what I did. And if you're really doing a big old mason jar or quart, then jams and jellies would be water bath processed for 15 minutes. Salsas, though, are longer. Pints of salsa will be water bath processed for 15 minutes and quarts for 20 minutes. Now, here's the thing. After the timer goes off, you turn off the heat and you leave your jams, jellies, salsas, chutneys, whatever, in the pot for about 5 minutes, letting the products settle and letting the boiling settle down too. So then removing them is much easier. Leave space between the jars. That'll help them cool easily and in a consistent way. And you will be rewarded very quickly, usually with that signature pop. You'll hear it. It's very loud. And that tells you your jars are sealed. That vacuum seal has done its job. And now your food is stable for up to a whole year, if it lasts that long. Now, you do not have to do this. If you're just making a couple of jars and you know you're going to eat them within a few weeks, then just put them in the fridge and that will be just fine. But if you would like to have any of these things last without going in the fridge or the freezer, just sitting on your pantry shelf, then water bath canning is a really easy and safe method of preserving your food. And you can confirm any of these details on many different sites. I will say you'll find some variations, but in general, this is how it works. And so there's really nothing to be afraid of. If you haven't done it before, I think you'll see that now. I will leave you with this one bit of information, though, that I thought was interesting, and that is that just to be on the really safe side, it's recommended that you not vary recipes too much. Now, if you've heard me talk or watched a few of my videos before, you know I love to experiment and vary recipes. With water bath canning, when you're dealing with keeping the acidity of a product at a certain level, you have to be careful with this. So you do not want to vary the amount of the acid ingredient, which would be the vinegar or the lemon juice that's put in that recipe. And of course, therefore, you wouldn't want to vary the amount, say, of the tomatoes or other vegetables and not increase the acidic agent in a consistent way, because there wouldn't be enough of it. If you've increased the vegetables and you don't increase the acid, you're going to have a problem. The things you can vary, though, and still have fun experimenting with recipes would be, with jams and jellies, you can vary the amount of sugar if you want to try for a less sweet product. You can definitely vary the different kinds and amounts of spices you add to any of these things. And you can also vary the types of the vegetables and fruits you're using. So, say, different kinds of tomatoes, different kinds of peppers, that type of thing. So I find that gave me enough leeway to have fun with these recipes and yet still be sure that I am producing a really shelf-stable and safe product for my family and myself. Well, guys, thanks for joining me today, and I hope you try this recipe out and others like it. Go ahead and experiment yourself. Let me know what you think. If you've got a great recipe for salsa, chutney, something else to do with green tomatoes, I would appreciate hearing from you. One thing I'm going to try this coming week is mock apple pie. I mentioned that in my garden tour a few days ago, and that is on the list for the next few days. Now, my next video, I'm going to be sharing with you how I made some rhubarb jam as well as some peach apricot jam, so you don't want to miss out on that. So have a great week, everyone. And remember, you can create the life you want, so why not start right now? What's stopping you? I think I'm going to go have some chips and salsa. That sounds pretty good right now. Wish you could join me.